There's nothing very complicated about the idea of a set point or about energy balance. Essentially, if we take in more energy than we use, then the inevitable consequence of that is that we'll put on weight. And in fact, we're very good at not putting on weight. Typically, people will have very stable weight over much of their lives. And in fact, although we have an obesity epidemic, if you put on just a pound in weight each year and you keep on that rate of growth for 10, 20 years, then the inevitable consequence of that is overweight or obesity. But a pound of weight a year isn't really very much. So in fact, we're very good at, if you like, defending our body weight or maintaining a stable body weight. And we can see that animals are very good at doing this as well. So that if you take a rat, for instance, and you underfeed it, if you deprive it of food for a period, then of course it will lose weight. But as soon as you put it back on normal weight, then very quickly it will regain the weight that it's lost and come back to that stable weight. And on the other hand, if you overfeed a rat by giving it very energy-dense food, then it will gain weight. But as soon as you go back to normal diet, then typically it'll return to that normal weight. So this is where the idea of a set point in body weight comes from. It's the weight at which our bodies think we ought to be, and they'll fight and tend to maintain that. Maintaining the set point and maintaining stable body weight is complex, and of course the body has to use lots of different kinds of information in order to do that. Different species and maybe different people use different cues and use them in different ways. We think that a large part of that set point is genetically determined, and probably determined by our early life experience. And if you like, we're given that set point as adults, and it's quite difficult to move and change that set point. So how do we defend our body weight? Because after all, we eat different amounts from day to day, and we use different amounts of energy from day to day, and sometimes in a quite unpredictable fashion. And it seems that we use lots of different kinds of information to maintain that stable body weight. We use information from our body fat stores. So our brain understands and knows continuously how much fat we're storing. Our brain doesn't have to look in the mirror to know that. We just know that from the hormones that are secreted from the fat cells. The brain also keeps track of how much energy we're using. And for instance, I mean, a lot of the energy that we use is in our what we call our locomotor activity, how active we are, but also in our body temperature. A lot of energy is used in maintaining our body temperature, and energy is used in maintaining our heart rate and our respiratory function. And our body keeps track of all of these things, and they all feed back into a drive for appetite and into our control of our basal metabolic rate. The simple answer has to be that we really still don't know. It's very difficult to understand what's going on. What's harder to explain is why we don't know things that perhaps we think we should know. At one stage, at one level, people could think it's very simple. If you eat too much, then you're going to put on weight. But it really isn't that simple. It isn't that simple because when we eat more, we also use more energy, and basal metabolic rate rises. And so it isn't a simple function of how much we're eating. It's also not clear that we are actually eating more. It's very, very difficult to be sure that this is happening at all. Part of the reason for that is that it's very difficult to track exactly how much people eat. We have really just two sorts of information about that. We have information on what's called food diaries, how much people record that they're eating. Well, the information from the food diaries isn't telling us that people are eating any more. Now, that might be because people are unreliable in recording how much they eat, and we don't know. But the problem is the data that we have aren't actually telling us that people are eating much more. The second sort of information that we can have is how much food is consumed by a country. You know, at a global level, at a gross level, we can get an idea of that. And the problem is that, again, when you actually look at that data, they're not telling a consistent picture. They're not really telling us that we're actually eating any more. Now, again, the problem is that maybe that data is unreliable. One of the difficulties is that not all of the food that a country produces is actually eaten. A lot of it is wasted. Well, how much is wasted? And so differences in how much is wasted could hide a big increase in food intake, and we just don't know. Well, why is it so difficult? Well, if we come back to the idea that putting on a pound of weight a year will drive people into overweight or obesity, and if we ask how much that translates to, well, a pound of weight is about 3,000, 4,000 excess calories. And that translates to about 100 calories a week, or less than that. Well, that's actually less than a banana a week. And that's the problem. If you take in more food than you use in energy to the extent of just a banana a week, then that can cause somebody to be overweight or obese over a long period. Now, this is just too small amount for us to be able to detect. And this is the fundamental problem, that we can account for obesity by a tiny excess of food intake, an excess that is too small for us to measure. But equally, we could account for obesity by a small reduction in energy expenditure of the same amount. So actually, we really don't understand at the moment. We don't know for sure what is causing the obesity epidemic. Why is it so difficult? And people, I think, don't appreciate why it's so difficult and so hard for somebody that's been obese for a prolonged period to lose weight. They don't and can't understand how terribly, terribly difficult it is. And the fact is that an obese person, when they're on calorie restriction, well, their brains and their bodies will respond as though they're literally starving. Though we know, we can stand back and say, obviously you're not starving, you've got lots of energy reserves. That's not what the brain thinks, and that's not what their bodies think. But whether their brain and body responds to starvation is to do a whole lot of things that are very uncomfortable. So if a person who is starving, the brain will switch off, for instance, reproduction. Libido will go flat. They will lower their metabolic rate. So people on diets feel cold because they are cold. They'll actually be running at a lower body temperature. They'll feel lethargic because they are lethargic. The brain will switch off unnecessary energy expenditure. They'll feel sluggish. It's difficult to get the energy to do anything. The brain will even switch off the immune system. So actually people on diets will tend to be more likely to get minor infections and constant respiratory illnesses. It's depressing. And at all this time, they will have a raging hunger. The brain will say, look, what's important is that you get more food. And that will dominate their thoughts and dominate their motivation. It's very, very difficult to kind of put up with all of these multiple hits at the same time. So it's people that successfully lose weight and maintain that weight loss, they really need massive congratulations. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. Of course, the experience of different countries is very different. And of course, there have been, in different countries, very major changes in diet, and different changes in different countries. In the UK, where we are at the moment, there's been really a major change in our diet, and the change has really been because of a move towards low-fat foods. So, for instance, when I was a child, all milk had a very high fat content. Now, overwhelmingly, people drink semi-skimmed milk or skimmed milk, and even the whole fat milk has much lower fat content than it used to. And that has been accompanied by a general reduction in fat consumption. Now, one of the interesting things, of course, is that the time when our fat consumption has been massively reduced, there's actually been an increase in BMI and an increase in the levels of obesity. So that big, if you like, experiment in changing our dietary pattern away from fat consumption didn't produce the expected outcome in BMI and obesity. If we look at the other factors like sugar, if you look at some countries like the United States, what we see there is a rise in obesity that parallels an increase in sugar consumption, and especially in the consumption of high fructose foods and drinks. But that hasn't been the case in all countries. In fact, again, in the UK, there's been a decline in sugar consumption, again in parallel with the increase in obesity. So it's very dangerous to take a message from one country and say that this is the explanation. Again, we don't know. It may be there are different explanations for the obesity epidemic in different countries, or maybe we're not looking in the right place or in the right way.